I'd just now like to introduce Francois Matarasso. We're very delighted that you've joined us here. Francois is an independent researcher and writer specialising in community cultural practice. His work focuses on practice-led research, mostly around the impact of participation in culture. Francois works as a consultant for arts organisations, foundations and public agencies on policy, organisational change and evaluation. He's an honorary professor at Gray's School of Art, Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, and International Fellow of the Centre for Cultural Research at Griffith University in Brisbane. He teaches and provides practice-based training. Until 1994, he worked as a community artist and creative producer in neighbourhood schools and institutions. An experience of arts practice and community development that continues to shape his work and writing. He's now based in Nottingham in the UK, and he works around the globe. Please welcome to the stage Francois Matarasso speaking on the Parliament of Dreams.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here. It's always a delight to be in Australia, and particularly Tasmania, which I've never seen before. And I'm very grateful to the Regional Arts Australia for inviting me and for the welcome to your country that I've had. When I called this talk the Parliament of Dreams, I had no idea that your election would be as entertaining. I hope you might end up with a real parliament. This is a photograph of an artwork by a German artist called Jochen Goetz. It's in Saarbrücken, and it's called The Square of the Invisible Monument. What Jochen Goetz did at night with some of the students from the art college was to lift up the cobblestones, and over a period of time, trying to avoid anybody noticing, they inscribed on the underneath of the cobblestones the names of about 2,500 pre-war synagogues in Germany, and then they put them back down. And eventually, of course, people realised they were doing this. And the city council had to have a think about whether it was happy about that. But it kind of did decide it was happy, and it has renamed the square of the Invisible Monument. And that's all you can see. Just the top sides of those cobblestones. And what I want to do now, you've had two really fascinating talks that are very practical and very directly related to your experience in Australia and in Tasmania specifically. I think I'm going to range quite widely and say quite a lot of stuff which may appear to be not very practical and quite controversial, perhaps, and maybe a bit invisible. Let me start with this question: does art matter? That's a fiercely contested question, of course, particularly nowadays when there seems to be less money around. Just three very short words, but two of them are about as slippery as language comes. How you respond to that question depends largely on what you understand by the words art and matter. And the problem is, the more you talk about those kinds of words, the slipperier they become. In everyday use, art isn't actually very problematic. When parents are asked if they want their children to have art education in school, there's a massive in the surveys that I've seen, something like 90% and more of parents who think it's really important that children should have access to the arts. So that's not difficult. Not difficult. Things become more complicated when you start turning to actual examples. And discussion becomes more contested. Is art what artists produce? If it is, then who's an artist? Are they born or are they made? What's the difference between a good artist and a mediocre one? What comparative value do we place on different artworks? And of course, does it matter? The question is tricky because it envelops two complex, intertwined, unresolved questions that people have been asking themselves since they've been people. What is a good life? What matters, in other words? And what is the purpose of creativity? Why do people make art? Why are we all here doing this stuff? Now, I'm not proposing to go over 3,000 years of philosophical debate in the next 25 minutes, even if I was capable of it. But I do want to try and propose a pragmatic answer to why art matters. One that is not definitive, but good enough. And one that has implications for cultural policy in a democratic society. People's ideas of art have varied, of course, over time and cultures. It's obvious. You just look at the material culture of 16th century Benin, Enlightenment Scotland, or Tokugawa Japan, and you come up with completely different representations and ideas and social uses and meanings of the culture. But the creation of art is consistent in all human societies. Why? Because such creativity, it's through such creativity that people grapple with the meaning of their experience. And seeking purpose in existence does seem to be one of the defining things that humans all share. The creation of stories, images, sounds, performances allow humans to reflect on, articulate, externalize, and share their experiences. And that's very much what's just been outlined in very concrete terms in the two presentations you've just heard. Through art, people seek to make sense, individually and collectively, of their experience of being alive. Shared meanings, those that are accepted, become accepted by groups of people, become cultures. The complex languages of signs that are taken as read by those who know them and mystify, fascinate, or repel those who don't. All artistic creation, from medieval frescoes to Chinese opera, from folk song to tags spray painted on subway walls, share the fundamental purpose of articulating its creators' values, and in doing so, seeking affirmation from others. That dialogue with the self and others, internal and external, is basic to humans. As George Steiner says, there is language, there is art, because there is the other. We do address ourselves in a constant soliloquy, but the medium of that soliloquy is public speech. And a lot of what I want to talk about this morning is how art becomes public speech and what the consequences of that are. The values that human beings express through their culture shape how they go about meeting their needs, leading to the endless variety of dress, faith, buildings, food, conduct, and other cultural diversity that we take for granted in the world. How much those differences and meanings they express matters to people is evident in the proportion of their resources that they are willing to dedicate to decorating a temple, preparing for a wedding, or dressing a baby. Whatever we make of medieval Christian worldview today, we have to recognise its foundational importance to European people, societies and cultures of the time. And perhaps if we do so, we might ask ourselves about our own view and values and culture that we take for granted, and difficult as that may be to do. But we're still free to make of medieval Christianity what we want. Because culture generally, and art specifically, expresses values, it does not follow that we have to share, endorse, or admire those values if we enjoy the artifacts that carry them or the creativity that produced them. We can admire Athenian democracy and remember that women were not citizens in Athens. We can love the theatre of Sophocles and recognise Greek society's dependence on slavery. Culture is a good insofar as it plays an essential part in helping humans to make sense of their existence and communicate profound and complex meanings with each other. But it does not follow that the sense they make and communicate is always good. Not all meanings are true, not all meanings are good, and not all meanings matter. But what about art? It's true nowadays the words art and culture are often used interchangeably, but I don't intend such an elision here. There is a blurred line between the two domains of art and culture, as the examples I've been drawing on already might suggest. But one important distinction between them is the degree of self-consciousness and particularly of self-criticality involved. If culture is understood as how people do the things they need to do to live and prosper, it adds meaning to what needs to be done. It's largely unconscious because everyday life would become impossible if we had to stop and ask ourselves about the cultural significance of what we eat or the underwear we put on. We'd never get anything done. Art, on the other hand, tries precisely to stop us, to invite us to become conscious of what we're thinking, feeling and doing. It rarely needs to be done, which is one reason why some people question whether it matters. For those with a strongly utilitarian frame of mind, there's no obvious need to write or read a book, put up a picture, or watch a performance. But there's a paradox here. People don't put effort into things that bring them no return. The French writer Jean-Paul Kaufmann describes a friend who maintains that literature serves no purpose, that it's not real life, it's never removed or changed anything in the world. He wrote that after spending 3 years as a hostage in Lebanon, where literature was a lifeline to him. The titles of those books, taken at random in a Dutch bookshop window, from the 9/11 Commission report to the origins of the final solution, suggest that books are much more important than Jean-Paul Kaufmann's friend admits. The mythical punishment imposed on Sisyphus to push a rock up a hill and then watch it roll down again was intolerable because of its essential pointlessness, exactly like the punishments inflicted on Victorian prisoners. The cruelty lies in the meaninglessness of it. People need meaning. And the historical evidence again shows that societies with far fewer resources than ours were still ready to invest in those resources in producing monuments, art, music and stories. So art may not have an obvious utility, but it's evident that it's useful to people. And part of the reason for that is that creating and receiving art is